What does it actually take to become an American citizen? We have the context missing from our biggest news stories on immigration. I'm Jenna, and this is Smarter News. Immigration is a central part of the Trump administration's first few months in office, with rapid stories about who's being deported and how, and a debate about the approach of law enforcement. But with all of this news, I found myself wondering, wait, what actually is supposed to happen? What's the quote unquote right way to do things? What is actually the law, and how has that law been enforced or not been enforced? We have a great guest to provide a foundation on this. Rachel Einbund practices immigration law in New York City. And as you'll hear, her personal story has impacted her professional calling. I started out asking her why she chose immigration law as a career. Rachel, let's just start with one part of the story, and that is, how did you become interested in immigration law?
Thank you for asking. I always love being asked this question because I feel that it really came from a place of passion and interest. So when I was in law school, I didn't know exactly what type of law I wanted to practice. I knew that I liked civil rights. I knew that I liked human rights, and I knew that I liked international law. And then I got the opportunity to do an internship at an asylum law firm. That was my first exposure to immigration law. I fell in love with the field. I was helping people escape persecution, help them write their story, help them prepare for their court hearings or their interviews. And it dawned on me, well, on my mother's side, I am the descendant of Holocaust survivors. And on my father's side, he immigrated from Argentina in the 1970s. So if it wasn't for immigration, I wouldn't be here. So it all came together, and I just decided, this is my love, this is my passion, immigration law. And by the end of my first year of law school, I decided to dedicate myself to becoming the expert in immigration law. So that's where it all started.
Wow, that's amazing, weaving together both the academic and the personal that leads you now to the professional. Can you tell us a little bit more about your family story, about how your mom's family was able to come to the United States and how your dad was able to also immigrate?
Absolutely. So on my mom's side, sadly, the family was, there were 10 children, and 8 of the children plus the parents were all murdered during the Holocaust. But the 2 baby girls managed to escape, take a boat. They landed in Brooklyn. My great grandmother was 8 years old when she got here. And somehow she became a US citizen and had my grandma and my mother, and they ended up resettling on Long Island in New York. And that's the story. So I always think, who helped her? Who helped that little girl that didn't speak English, that had lost her parents and all of her older siblings? Someone must have helped her. And I think about that story a lot because I am now that person for many
Hmm.
people. So that's my mom's side. On my father's side, during the 1970s, there was a dictatorship in Argentina, and a lot of people really had no other choice but to leave, to seek freedom, to seek rights in the United States. Luckily for them, they had an aunt that had already immigrated here. So through petition after petition, he was able to eventually get his green card. And he didn't speak a word of English, the classic immigrant story with $20 in my pocket and a dream. He came here and he learned English. He ended up graduating from college, going to law school, and becoming a naturalized US citizen. So when I look at my family's history, I feel I was destined to do this, that someone must have helped my family get here. And I was just lucky and blessed to have been born in this country.
What incredible stories, Rachel. I mean, wow. These are amazing, truly American stories. And we all have one. If we're in America, we have an immigration story, even if it is, hundreds of years ago, this is what happened, or something more recent. So, one of the reasons I really wanted to speak to you is to understand the immigration process. Even as a journalist, I don't really totally understand the process. I'm told it can take many, many years if you're an asylum seeker. It can take many, many years if you're married to an American citizen, and that the process is hard, challenging, and expensive. And that's probably the extent of what I know about it. So tell us a little bit about, in immigration law, who do you particularly work with?
There are many ways to immigrate to the United States. Some people come here on a temporary basis as a non immigrant. Maybe you're a visitor, a student, or you're on a temporary work contract. And then we have the people that want to live here permanently. So they're seeking green cards and eventually citizenship. You always have to have a green card before you become a citizen. So there are only 5 ways to get a green card. That's it: through family sponsorship, through work sponsorship, through asylum, through an investment, or by winning the diversity visa lottery. That's it. You only have 5 ways to get a green card. So my expertise is particularly in the family sponsorship route or the asylum route. So a family-based petition, such as a fiance visa or a US citizen that marries a foreigner, or the asylum route, which is people who are seeking protection in the United States because they have suffered persecution on account of a protected ground, such as their race, their religion, their nationality, political opinion, or membership in a social group such as LGBT. So these are my areas of expertise, but immigration is an entire world in and of itself. That's why us immigration lawyers tend to specialize in one area or another. It's very, very complicated. People say that immigration is the hardest area of law to practice because there's just so many regulations. And nowadays, the rules are changing constantly. So I have to do my day job, but I also have to keep myself informed every day. I have to read the news, read the policies, read practice advisories about what's going on. So my expertise is in the family-based and the humanitarian-based.
How difficult is it to get a green card?
Well, it depends. And that is your most typical lawyer answer, right? The answer is always, it depends. If you're married to a citizen, for example, your marriage is real, it's bona fide, you can prove it. You have a wedding or an engagement, you have proof that you've cohabitated together, that you're commingling your finances, then it should be a straightforward process. Of course, if you have any criminal record, if you've been deported, if you've ever lied or misrepresented yourself on an immigration application, then you're going to face problems. But people who have always been following the law, who have been doing it right, and who are completely honest with their application forms in terms of their background and their marriage, it should be a smooth process. It should be a very smooth process. But if you have anything in your record, expect to have a bumpy ride.
And when you say a smooth process, how long could it take?
That's a very good question. And again, it depends. But if I say average 1 year, that's a fair answer. For some people, it takes less. Right now, I'm seeing green card interviews be scheduled after only 4 or 5 months. So that's really fast, these marriage-based cases. Whereas at other times, certainly during the pandemic or during other administrations, it can take a year or longer to get the green card. So anywhere between, let's say, 4 months and 2 years, which I realize for people,
I mean, that's a big
quite a
time
bit.
frame, but it's quite honestly, it's shorter than I thought it was going to be, because that's one of the things you hear on repeat is just how laborious the system is. When you mentioned that it seems that interviews are being scheduled sooner, is that a recent change under this new administration, or has that been something that's been a trend?
That is breaking news, Jenna. That is very, very recent. Prior to the new administration, the prior administration had a policy of waiving interviews so long as the evidence proved beyond a doubt that the marriage was bona fide. And they didn't feel the need to interview the couples. They can do the background check through their own systems. Of course, the person has to show up for fingerprinting and biometric services. But if they felt that the evidence was sufficient, they would just approve the green card and it would come in the mail. Starting on January 20th, that policy is no more. Every single couple is required to attend an interview. So I'm seeing interviews scheduled for cases that I filed in August of 2024, November of 2024, and I just got one that was sent in January of 2025. So it seems that the interview process is moving along quite quickly. They want to get people in and out in a timely fashion.
And they want to see someone face to face. What do you think that's about? And do you think that's a positive?
That's how it always has been. The interview waiver came during the pandemic. So that's the classic
Interesting.
way of getting the green card, is that the couple has to show up for an interview. Look, sadly, a lot of people do try to defraud the government with green card marriages, with fake marriages. And it's absolutely horrible. I am so against fraud marriage because it jams up the system where these real couples now have to wait forever to get their day, to get their interview, to get their case approved. So I like the interview process because I think it's a great way for the government to figure out who's real and who's fake. The officers are trained very specifically to ask questions that only real couples will know the answer. It's a very tried and true
Interesting.
method. It's fascinating, Jenna, and especially when I go to. In fact, I was had a green card interview just this morning, and the questions that they ask are so tailored to the couple that if you're not in a real marriage, you may not know the answer to some of these questions. And
Can
immediately
you
the
tell us
officer
one of
will,
those? I want to.
for
I want to
example,
know them.
how about this one? How many
Okay.
grandchildren does your mother-in-law have?
Ooh, that is really. And I'm wondering if I know the answer to it. No, a lot is the answer. But you're right. You're right. I could. I think I could. I think I could answer that. I think she has like 16, 17. But there's quite a few on that side. And I'm thinking about it. You're right. That probably wouldn't be something that if it was a casual or a business relationship that you wouldn't necessarily know. Now, do you sit in most interviews? Is that a lawyer would sit and be present?
Absolutely, yes. I sit in the back of the
Okay.
room, I stay quiet, and I only intervene if necessary. I let my clients do all the work, let them tell their story, and let the officer see that they are a real couple. I prepare them, of course. We do practice interviews before the interview takes place. But I don't over prepare them. I don't want them to sound like robots. I want the answers to come naturally. I just give them an idea of what to expect. And hopefully they get all of the questions right. It's extremely rare that my clients don't get approved because, like I said before, I take marriage fraud very, very, very seriously. And if you can't pass through me, you're not going to pass through immigration. So I would never take a client that I had a suspicion was not a real marriage. So I feel confident going into all of these interviews. But sometimes the questions are hard. Sometimes people get nervous. They forget their spouse's birthday, or if they recently had a birthday, they may get the age wrong. That actually happens more often than you would think. Uh,
I could see that being the case. Well, that's very interesting. Again, a part of the immigration process I don't really think that as much about as for example asylum, and that's something we've been talking so much about in recent years. I mean, that predates this administration. I mean, we're talking about really my entire time as a professional journalist. There have been stories regarding asylum policy, and especially because of what we're seeing, different numbers at the U.S. southern border, and quite frankly, the northern border too, which is an ignored story. But talk us through that process, Rachel, because that is confusing. We know that there's a certain definition you have to meet, typically for applying for asylum, which has to do with persecution. And I'll let you explain that. But we also know that the sheer amount of people coming across the border at certain times, it was a matter of policy and practice that there would be some leniency given to those that want to pursue asylum. Perhaps that wasn't uniform across the last several decades. And that has led us into a process where there's a lot of people that are allowed to stay in the country while they're pursuing these claims. And this is difficult to look through because the numbers are so high, but everyone's individual story is so different. So talk to us about that. Like, what is that process like? If I'm an asylum seeker and I'm in this country, walk me through what has to happen before I'm able to permanently stay.
Sure. So asylum is a very old concept, and people come to the United States because of who we are, because we believe in freedom, because we believe in liberty, because we believe in free speech, and we give our residents the freedom to be themselves, to be who they are, regardless of your religion, your race, political opinion, or sexual orientation. So to start, The first thing is the policy of 1 foot in the sand, which means you need to be here to apply for asylum. You need to have 1 foot in the country, and then you can say, I want asylum. So that's the first step. You cannot apply for asylum from outside of the United States. If you're outside, you're a refugee. Refugees are inherently outside the country. If you've got 1 foot in the country, you can apply for asylum. What does that look like? Well, first of all, you must file your application within 1 year of stepping foot inside of the country. Strict deadline. Very, very few exceptions to that deadline. If you apply within 1 year, it starts with filing an asylum application form. It's called the I-589, and it's about a 14-page form that goes through your entire history. Address history, educational history, work history, family history, and of course, why are you seeking asylum? Now, to win asylum, you must meet the definition of an asylee. An asylee is someone who has either suffered past persecution or who has a well-founded fear of future persecution, either or. But it's not just that. So you have to have suffered past persecution or have a well-founded fear of future persecution on account of a protected ground at the hands of your government or a group or a person that the government is unable or unwilling to control. So that's the definition. It's complex. It's quite complicated. And to win asylum is extremely difficult. It is not easy. In fact, less than 20% of people who apply for asylum actually get approved. Most people get denied because it's very high standard to meet. And how do you prove that? You know, if you've escaped, you may not have police records, you know, from the police that arrested you for expressing your political opinion, saying, yes, he was arrested for expressing his political opinion. You're not going to have that. You may not have the hospital records after a physical injury. Witnesses may not be willing to testify for you because they're scared. You may have left without even a passport. So the cases are hard because many people do not have documentation of their persecution. So every case is different.
Well,
you have to really get into the story.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why and I hope in the future we can talk about specific cases. Right now, I'm going to use some general scenarios that we've seen in the news because I'm just curious, like, what is the process supposed to be like? Or is this the way the process is like, and we just don't realize it because we haven't seen these stories recently? So in one particular scenario, we have some mothers that were reporting what we believe to be they were coming to kind of check in on their immigration status. They had permission to stay in the country, and they were reporting to either follow up on a request for them to appear. And it was during that process, and maybe you can even shed some more light on what that process is like, that they found out that they were no longer going to be allowed to stay in the country and they would be deported, that it could happen like that. Is that typical? What about that process or that sort of scenario that we've heard about in the news recently?
A lot of the stories we hear in the news right now are about immigrants and not for immigrants. And what I mean by that is it's a lot of storytelling without the detailed procedural history. So that's a really hard question for me to answer because I don't know what she had. Was she showing up for an ICE check-in, a routine ICE check-in? Did she have an order of deportation already? Was her case perhaps administratively closed because during one administration they were showing a lot of leniency for mothers that had U.S. citizen children and just said, all right, we're not worried about you. You're not a criminal. And her case was closed and now suddenly it's reopened. So the procedural background of this story is really nebulous, and it's hard for me to say what happened to her because I don't know. The news outlets aren't giving me the case file.
Yes.
Immigration is so complicated. I need more details here to understand exactly what happened.
Well, and this is exactly the problem that I'm running into, which is part of the reason we're talking today, which is I'm like, but what exactly was it? Was it an asylum check-in, or was this something else? Or what exactly were these things, and what do you call them? And we're not getting, sometimes not getting all that information, either because we're not asking the right questions, by the way, because we don't know what questions to ask, or it's also a legal case that maybe I don't have access to the information.
What I can tell you is this, though. If a person has a pending case, whether it's a pending green card, a pending citizenship, a pending asylum, they're not supposed to be deported until a decision is made on that case, right? So it sounds to me that this woman did not have a pending case. She probably had a deportation order, but for one reason or another, it was not executed. She wasn't actually physically deported. So some type of prosecutorial discretion was exercised in her case so that, okay, yes, you have a deportation order, but okay, you're a single mom, you've got a couple of kids, you've never been arrested, we know where you are. Check in with us once a year and you can stay. So that might be the situation with this woman or other people in a similar situation. So nowadays, if you show up for that annual ICE check-in, bring a suitcase because you may not be going home.
And that's just a matter of how a current administration, whoever they are, is applying current law. It's the way that the law is being enforced, not the law itself.
That's absolutely right. Yes.
Okay. So let me ask you another
ramping
question.
up an expansion of enforcement. You're seeing a real aggressive take on numbers. We want to deport 1 million people, and these are the low-hanging fruit. These are the people that already have the deportation. We don't have to go back to court. We don't have to litigate this. You show up, time to go, and they can put you on the bus, and there's nothing that the government can do to stop that.
Okay, so that was my next question, which is like, what do you get a chance to say something? We've had all these questions about due process and who gets due process, and what is the scenario like? Let's say that I haven't been arrested in this country. Maybe I was given permission to stay for any number of reasons. Either I had to show up to check in with ICE, I'm an asylum seeker, whatever the scenario is. And I'm in front of law enforcement, and law enforcement saying, guess what? You're going to go. Do I have a case in front of a judge? Do I get to be seen in front of a judge before that happens? If I'm not an American citizen, what is my right inside this country to due process in these particular situations?
That's a great question. And let me answer this by saying everyone has the right to due process. Now, in the scenario we just talked about, the woman that already had a deportation order, it's safe to assume she already had her day in court. Due process has already happened for her. She lost. She got the deportation order, but she didn't leave for one reason or another, whether she was allowed to stay or not. In the case of, let's say, a student, they go to university here, the visa's expired, they didn't get a job, but they stayed. Right? They just never left. And now they encounter law enforcement for any reason. They would be served with a letter called a notice to appear. So that means you need to show up in immigration court and tell us why you shouldn't be deported. That's due process. So it really depends where on the timeline you are. If you have never been to immigration court, but you are here without permission, you should get a letter telling you it's time to come to immigration court to defend yourself. That's the defensive deportation that I handle. So you do get a chance to argue your case, so to speak, apply for some relief from removal to be able to stay here, whether, again, you're married to a citizen, you qualify for asylum or some other form of relief. But if a person has already had their day in court and the judge has made a fact-finding decision, decided that for one reason or another, they do not qualify for asylum or relief, and they are ordered deported, then they should expect that deportation order will be executed.
I'm thinking of so many different scenarios washing over me that we've covered in the last several months, including, for example, a student that was here on a visa who was taken into custody and then was kept in custody. He wasn't released to to formulate a case. Is that typical? Can someone be held in custody in ICE detention until their day of court? I'm thinking too about a Russian student that was working in the Ivy Leagues who mistakenly brought something with her into the country, but it's a little complicated. I won't get into it. It has to do with research involving frogs. I'm laughing because it's like this scenario you don't really even think about. She's pulled aside. She's put in detention. She's kept in detention though. She's not released to figure out what to do next. She's kept. Is that typical that someone would be kept in custody until their day in court?
It would depend on, first off, if the person is an aggravated felon, then they are not getting out of custody until their case is heard. So, but that doesn't sound like this scenario. The other consideration is this person a flight risk or is this person a threat to national security? So in this particular case, the government may have made the argument that indeed she is a flight risk. She's going to leave. So they're keeping her in custody so that they know her whereabouts. But typically, no. Typically, a person who is perhaps detained, served with that notice to appear, they would get the opportunity for a bond hearing. And their lawyer, or they would have to show that they are not the threat to national security, they're not a flight risk, they're going to appear for all of their hearings, they'd be released on bond, and only after the case is complete would they get that bond back. Another thing that used to happen a lot was electronic monitoring, bracelets, ankle bracelets. So people might be in custody, do the bond hearing, and then get released with an ankle monitor so that ICE can keep track of that person. So it's not typical. We are seeing a ramping up of detention nowadays, that people are being detained for longer, that bond hearings are not being given, or that bond is being denied. Bond is a discretionary issue. It is up to the judge. So if the judge doesn't want to give bond, they don't have to, and you can't appeal that.
What is the biggest change in immigration that you've seen within the last several months of the Trump administration?
Every day we have a new policy. That is, I think, an overall change. You know, law is supposed to be something that we can rely on. We know what the laws are, so we know how to behave. But when the laws and the rules of the game keep changing every day, it's very difficult to keep up. For example, we have the birthright citizenship case that's coming up next week before the Supreme Court. We have a dramatic shift in border crossings. We have the firing of dozens of immigration judges, while the backlog is now growing to over 3 million cases. We have the new alien registration requirement. We have the termination of refugee processing. So the biggest change is keeping up with the changes, is keeping up with what's going on. And for me, I have to advise my clients accordingly. But I think that the biggest change that I think most Americans and immigrants are seeing is people thinking that they had years to be here or that they had time. And now that clock is winding very, very quickly and time is running out.
I didn't ask you that question. For an asylum seeker, again, we know all the cases are different, but typically if you were dealing with someone pursuing asylum, what would the time frame previously look like during your career?
Well, I remember when I first started, an asylum interview would be scheduled in 6 months, and you would know right away if they got approved or if they had to go to immigration court to face deportation. Then there was a massive, massive backlog because of the humanitarian crisis happening in Central America. So we saw a massive influx of asylum applicants during the 2000s and the 2010s. So cases went from 6 months to a year to 2 to 3 to 5 to 10 years. I myself have some cases that I filed in 2015 that still never got an interview. Then, a few months ago, it flipped around. So if you file your asylum case right now, you can expect to get an interview within 60 days.
60 days?
Yes.
So how do you view that, Rachel? Like, I'm curious, is that a great thing is that I would think that speed is of the essence for everybody to know if they're able to stay, if they can make plans. But then I'm thinking about the person that's been here for 10 years, that's been trying to legally go through the process to maybe find that they don't have an asylum claim. I mean, it's hard to use a broad brush and paint all of these cases the same way. But what do you think about that?
Personally, I love it. I love it because I want to get these cases out. I'm sick of the delays. This case from 2015, 2016, 2017, what happened to this person is now 10 years old. The evidence is stale. The person that persecuted them might be dead or out of office, or the government has changed, and now the party that you supported is in control. So the case can be detrimentally affected by the long waiting time. Whereas if you come here, you have a claim, you have your claim heard timely, in a timely fashion, that's great. At least you know your fate. So I'm on the side of, yes, let's process these cases quickly, but how are they going to get through this backlog? Look, my opinions may not reflect the entire immigration lawyer community. I've always been like that. I'm very much person that follows the rules, follows the laws. I don't take risks. I want to do things the right way. Yes, of course, I advocate zealously for my clients, but I would rather follow the rules. I think that that's very important. We have laws for a reason. So if you're coming here, you're applying for asylum, you have a good case, you should get your interview scheduled as quickly as possible and find out, okay, do I have a future here, or do I need to figure out my plan B?
How big of a problem do you think immigration is in America right now? When we think about the numbers that we know of people that are in the country with some status of permission, or those that are in the country without permission, how would you even handicap the problem or the challenge that immigration is in America today? And if you could give one piece of advice to this current administration about how to make it more efficient, what would it be?
Thank you for that question. And it's rare that my personal ideas are asked about, because I do have ideas, because I'm seeing this every day. So the last time we had immigration reform was right after 9/11. The entire Department of Homeland Security did not even exist until 2003. So we are overdue for immigration reform. The system is bursting at the seams. The amount of immigrants we have now is way more than we had 20 years ago. So, just like if your business is growing, maybe you need a new office, maybe you need to hire more staff. That's what's happening here, but nothing is actually changing. So I'm not saying expand the agency. I think they have to come up with creative ways to get the right people. And what I mean by right people are law-abiding people who have shown dedication to this country, who want to do it the right way, who want to do the right thing. Give them a fair path to legalization. There was a program that started under the first Bush administration called 245I. And what 245I did said, okay, look, we have a lot of undocumented people here, but if you're married to a citizen, the son of a citizen, the child of a citizen, and you file a petition before April 30th, 2001, it started with 1998, but then it was extended till 2001, it's okay that you cross the border. Pay a fee, a penalty fee of $1,000 per person, and we'll give you a green card. Tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people got their green cards that way, and it was an excellent policy. The federal government made a lot of money off of that policy, giving people status, but charging them for it. A penalty fee. I'm sorry I did it, but I have a good case. Of course, everyone had to pass a background check, very strict restrictions on anyone having criminal history. I think they should revive 245I. I think they should give people the opportunity to file, to have a legal path to legalizing themselves if they can prove that they're here for the right reasons, that they can financially support themselves. They're not going to need welfare and food stamps and cash benefits, that they are obviously don't have any criminal record whatsoever. I take that very seriously. And give them a path If you don't qualify, then you're going to have to fight your case in deportation court. If you're committing felonies, you don't belong here. I personally very strongly believe in that. But you have to give people a path. And at the same time, charge them. People will pay. Let me tell you, all the immigrants that are here, everyone is working. Come on, everyone is working. You know, everyone is working. And people are saving their money for the hope that one day they can legalize their status. People are saving up for this. So if you give people a chance to do it the right way, to apply, to go through the process, to prove themselves and pay a fee, I think it would solve a lot of problems. So we need to really look at some of the laws that have worked in the past couple of decades, see what worked then, will it work now, revive some of these old policies, and I think it would be very, very, very helpful. That's
That
just
is
one of
so well, gosh, well, we got to get you on a committee somewhere, Rachel. I mean, that sounds like a very interesting idea, because what you're talking about is making it easier for the people that have family. As you're talking, I'm going back to this interview I had. It was very informative on Ellis Island. I was talking to the historian there, and we have to remember Ellis Island is legal immigration. They were checking certain things like, do you have family? Do you have a job? If you have asthma and you're going to an area that is particularly dry with dust, we may not think that's a good idea. And we may think we're not going to approve that particular move for you. I mean, it was that specific. And listen, there was good and bad. As a single woman, if I didn't have a man that was answering for me, they were letting me off the boat to just wander around New York City hoping to find some work, So again, not all the past policies are perfect, but there was an oversight. And if you had family here, if you were going to go in a certain line of work, it was part of saying, this is good for the economy and the labor force. We're going to allow you in. And if that money doesn't go to the government, like you're talking about, it's going to bad people, attorneys that want to fleece their clients, or traffickers, or things like that, because if you're trying to pay your way in, you don't have this option that you're talking about. It's very interesting. I can't wait to look more into it.
Yeah, and there was also a pathway for if you were sponsored by an employer. Some businesses need and rely on immigrants for their business to succeed. So that would take the place of a family petition. So you would need a family member or an employment sponsorship. You pay a fine, and it was $1,000 in 1998. Make it more. Make it $10,000.
If someone gets a green card, do they have to become a citizen at some point, or can they forever exist in the United States as a green card holder?
No, they do not have to become a citizen. In fact, I did a consultation with a woman from Singapore last week who never became a U.S. She's had her green card for over 30 years. She never became a citizen because Singapore does not allow dual citizenship, and she felt a very close kinship to her birth country and maybe eventually wanted to retire there. So you just renew your green card every 10 years, but of course you have to pass background checks. Going through the green card process, the citizenship process, this isn't like applying for, even a marriage license or a driver's license. There are severe background checks. They have to take your photo, facial recognition technology. They take your fingerprints. You have to do a medical exam to show that you don't have any communicable diseases. So there's a lot of hoops that immigrants have to jump through. But no, a person can remain their entire life in the United States as a permanent resident and never naturalized. That is allowed.
That's also an interesting thing to think about as we're thinking about this whole picture, because there are some people that want to come and want to work and want to be contributing members of American society, but maybe don't want to be here permanently. And again, we're kind of casting these big nets and kind of generalizing everybody as the same. And you wonder if that works. And again, the media is, in part, I'm raising my hand, to blame for that. In highly complicated situations, we don't get these longer conversations. We usually have 30 seconds. And for this particular topic, I don't know if it really helps us. Rachel, this has been so informative. Thank you. I really appreciate this. And I look forward to having you back. It'd be great to talk to you about some of these specific cases as we get them. And of course, the Supreme Court's looking at a lot of big issues. So thank you for spending some time with us today. We really appreciate it.
It has been my pleasure, and I am always here for you, Jenna. Whenever you have any immigration-related questions, please come to me. It would be my pleasure to answer for you, for your viewers, for your fans. And I think it's very important that people start to get a better understanding of this system and to be as informed as possible. So thank you for the
Well,
opportunity.
I appreciate that. And with the amount of policy changes, you better be careful because you're going to get like 16 texts a week. I'm like, Rachel, what about this? What about this other thing?
16,
Hopefully we
more
can
like
work through it
96
together.
calls a
Yes.
day. I have 24 voicemails that I just got during this meeting. But, to be busy is very good. I'm just going to continue to do my best to stay informed, to help the people that I can, and to be honest, because some people I'll be able to help and some people I won't. And I think it's very important for immigration lawyers to be brutally honest with their clients or prospective clients about their chances, manage people's expectations, and if there's a path to guide them, but if there's not a path, to also advise them truthfully and honestly as well.
Well, I think we all get that. I'm like, Rachel's the sort of lawyer I'd want to hire. She's going to go for it. She's going to be by the book. Like, you have a great way of talking about the law, Rachel, and a really fascinating backstory. And thank you so much for spending some time with us.
My pleasure. Take care.